But alright, we'll get into it. Like I said, this is Chess Openings Explained. I'm the host, Nick Risko, and tonight's opening is going to be the Elephant Gambit. So, this is a gambit that I faced in a tournament just a couple months ago against the U.S. Women's Blind Champion, Jessica Lauser, and it inspired me to study this opening further because I really didn't know what I was doing and found out that there's some really interesting lines in here. So we'll go over it. Starts out with e4 and e5, and just the king's pawn opening, and here white goes knight to f3, and this is just developing the knight towards the center to attack the pawn. And the gambit now comes here after pawn to d5, which looks a little strange at first, not going to lie, where black is really offering up either of these pawns. White can capture either one, and well, I guess we should start looking at what happens if we take the one on e5 with our knight. We'll get a look at pawn takes in a little bit, but I want to cover pretty much all the lines in this opening. We'll do a bit of a survey here, starting with knight takes e5. And after knight takes e5, there's a couple different moves they have here, but it looks like the main ones are bishop to d6 and pawn takes e4. So we will start with bishop to d6. This is the main line here, and see what white should play. Now d4 is the main move here, just defending the knight. It doesn't really make sense to move backwards after we've already moved the knight into the center. We only want to move it back later if we really need to, but we go d4, we can defend, and now black will normally take on e4 here. And now white has a couple different options of how they can continue. They can start with either bishop to c4. They also have knight to c4, and there is also knight to c3. So we'll start with knight to c3 here. The material on the board is equal, but black's pawn on e4 is definitely going to become a problem later on because this pawn is already crossed the center. It's in white's territory. It's not the same story for white's pawn on d4. So because of this, white has a small but lasting advantage if black doesn't do anything about it. And white just needs to be careful not to take on e4 too early, because if black develops quickly, they can generate some play on the e-file with moves like queen to e7, and after they castle, rook to e8, and then get some play on the e-file. But that's about as much as I'm going to talk about the knight c3 line here. What's a little bit more, actually, what's more interesting is bishop c4, but I do need to cover knight c4 first here. Is knight c4, this is just a very safe move for white, where you retreat the knight. You can't go back to f3 or d3, so you go to c4 while you can, and it attacks this bishop. And normally, black is going to give up this bishop, because if you move this bishop too many times, you are going to fall behind in development. So this is normally a safe positional continuation where white gets the bishop pair, but that's about it. It's really hard to put pressure on everything else just because both sides don't have a whole lot developed here. In the chat, NJFan9000 is asking, is the Elephant Gambit good for 1100 rated players? I think that it's possible to play at almost any level as long as you know what you're doing as black. There are a couple lines that do stand up in correspondence chess that I was looking at. So I think it's good, especially in Blitz and Bullet, where opponents may not be expecting it. But again, you have to know your lines pretty well because it's very easy for black to go wrong. We'll see some of those later. So we're going to look at bishop c4 right now. So this is after we take on e5, they take on e4, and we play bishop c4 here. And really this move is just a direct attack on f7 that forces black to give up the bishop. There's really no other way to defend this pawn. If you try something like knight h6, I can just capture, and then after you take back, then I can take on f7 with either the knight or the bishop. So you can't really defend it really anyway. So you have to take on e5. And after you take on e5, it might become very instinctual to take with your d-pawn on e5 here. But there is a slight drawback here where black can take on d1 and white forfeits their right to castle. And now after knight c6, black easily at least has equality because this pawn on e5 is a weakness and it's very difficult to try and hold on to it. Bishop f4 is your only move to really try, but now, I mean, black can just continue developing normally, and then followed up by knight g6 can be very dangerous for white as far as material is concerned. So instead of taking with your d-pawn, you do have this kind of in-between move, queen to h5, and what this does is it forks a mating square and the bishop, so now black has to save himself from mate here, and now when you take with the queen and the queens get traded off the board, the difference is that white has not given up the right to castle, which means you can castle on the next turn, bring your rook to e1, and this pawn on e4 is going to be falling. So that's the difference between taking right away and then playing queen h5 first. So a nice little trick to know there. So that is kind of the different lines after bishop to d6. I also want to take a look at what happens if black takes back right away on e4. Once they take on e4, they're restoring material right away. Both sides have traded off a pawn. Now again, this pawn on e4, very weak, not much that is protecting it. And that's kind of why this is still a gambit. You're pretty much going to give up this pawn. Okay, so how does white continue from here? You have a knight on e5, you have a couple open lines for your pieces, but what is the best way to develop here? Well, I think the strongest way is just start with bishop to c4. So you're getting ready to castle kingside, where you can put your rook on e1 and challenge the pawn. And you're also getting this attack on f7. Pablo in the chat is saying best way for white to play is e takes d5. Yes, I'm not saying that knight takes e5 is the best move here. I'm going over a survey of the entire opening. So I always get this, people try and suggest the best moves after I already say the current line isn't good enough. Just make sure to be patient, guys. Always talking about the current position. So after bishop to c4, you are hitting f7, getting ready to take with either piece. What does black do here? Well, black has this move, queen to g5, and this f7 pawn is hanging temporarily, but I do want to take just a moment here to take a look at what exactly is going on. Right now, black is saving themselves from this knight fork, and in addition, they are giving this threat on g2. Now, this position is not equal, not winning for black. This is much better for white. But if white doesn't know what they're doing, they can go wrong very quickly. For instance, if white tries knight f7 right away, forking the queen and rook, this is just dead lost. Queen takes g2, rook f1 is the only move to save this rook and from attack on your king. And now, after bishop to g4, they're attacking the queen. The only move to save the queen is bishop e2. They trade on e2, and after the trade on e2, they take the knight on f7. And here, you can see that white is down a piece. They are down a knight. So here, this is really not good for white. Yes, the king is exposed, but with one less piece, it's very hard to attack. You don't have a direct attack anyway. And it's hard to get this queen out of your position right away. So black is actually going to have very easy development, bringing their pieces into the fight. White is still going to have to do a little bit of work to get this bishop out. And just being down a piece, it's not going to be a fun time. So while queen g5 does have this little trap to it, there are still two good ways for white to continue. We'll start with looking at d4, which is a good move here, and after queen g2, now you can take on f7 with the bishop as an in-between move. You let this rook hang for one move because this comes with check, and after they save the king, now you go rook f1 saving the rook. And now after knight to c6, any time that this knight comes to c6 and challenges your knight on e5, you need to make sure that you're not going to hang this bishop on f7. So you bring this bishop back to c4. Hey there, remembering truth. So let's see here. After bishop to c4, knight f6, and white just has a better position here. Black's king is kind of moved. They're going to be struggling to develop their dark square bishop, and this queen, it is a little dangerous being this far into white's position, but currently not really doing much. So moves like knight c3 aren't terrible here, bishop e3, or even bishop, actually not bishop g5 because of the queen. So you do have to be careful, but with normal development, I think this should be fine for white. However, like I said, this is not the absolute best try. I think the best try here is going with the bishop right away. You're going to play d4 later. Just go take this pawn right away here. Trying to understand what Pablo's saying in the chat here. But it looks like they're giving notation with some other languages letters, and I don't understand. I'm sorry. James Berry is saying that black pawn could be dangerous. This pawn on e4 actually is not too dangerous here. Most of the time it does fall. But okay, we're going to get back to this line here after bishop takes f7. The king does normally go to e7. King to d8 has not been explored, and because it's never been played before, I'm just not going to go over it. Play is going to remain relatively the same. If they go king d8, you just play d4. But here after king e7, pawn to d4 here, and now after queen to g2, you go rook f1. And here there's kind of two different moves that theory suggests. Theory has always suggested knight to d7, and after knight to d7, again, when this knight comes to attack the knight on e5, you need to make sure this bishop is still going to be safe, because after this trade, it's going to fall. So you see bishop to c4, and white should obtain an advantage here with accurate play, according to theory. There is a bit of a newer idea that has been played a couple times with knight to c6, and here it looks like if you take, black should be afraid of having doubled pawns here. But they're actually not afraid of having doubled pawns, and not really afraid of the bishops not moving here. And it's been a bit of a debate of whether knight d7 or knight c6 is better here. And again, here, because the knight is being attacked, just bishop c4, and engines will just say white is better. I do want to just take a look here and see what is happening if we take on c6 here with the knight, because this is what black is kind of inviting whenever he goes knight c6. But after the pawn takes on c6 and bishop to c4, after knight f6, we realize that without more pieces on the board, white has kind of lost that presence, and black is able to develop with ease. There's really nothing here that black needs to be afraid of with only the bishop developed. So like this queen is still kind of watching the king side here. This knight may try and jump in, or the bishop. So this is at least equal here. I don't think black is so much better, but I would prefer to have black in this position just because white has given up that presence in the center here. So that's kind of what black is aiming for if white goes for this. And that covers pretty much, I think, all of the main lines after the knight takes on e5. So after knight takes e5 here in the center, they can take here, and I guess we also looked at bishop to d6, just d4, and if they take, you can develop attacking f7. And you just have to remember this intermezzo with queen h5. So that's all the knight takes e5 lines. Now, you notice here black does have moves that give them a couple traps, a couple advantages there, stuff that white does have to watch out for. So with white, we also want to take a look at what happens if you take on d5, and this one I will recommend. E takes d5, I have to say, is better than taking with the knight. So e takes d5, there's a couple things happening here. It looks like you're just trading off pawns, but we'll get into what happens if the queen takes, we'll get into what happens if the pawn pushes. And I think we will start right away just by looking at what happens if the queen takes. This variation in the Elephant Gambit is known as the Scandinavian Variation. And for those of you who are unfamiliar, the Scandinavian is e4, d5 takes, and then the queen takes is what the old main lines were. Nowadays, knight f6 is more popular, but most openings where there's a capture on d5 and the queen recaptures has the name Scandinavian Variation in it because of this opening. So after the queen takes here, we enter the Scandinavian Variation of the Elephant Gambit. Now, this is not recommended, mainly because this is a worse version of the Scandinavian for black. Normally, in a regular Scandinavian, black is going to be able to play pawn to c6 and e6, and then bring the queen to a5 and bring it back on a diagonal. But here, in most lines, this queen is just going to be out in the open, and white really is able to take advantage of this to develop energetically. So knight to c3 attacking the queen, queen goes to e6, and now after bishop to b5 check, black does get c6 like they want, and after bishop a4, just saving the bishop. One of black's better moves here is queen to g6, just making sure that they can bring their bishop into the game either on f5 or g4, and kind of just keep the center open for the rest of their pieces here. After queen to g6, queen to e2 is the main move, hitting e5. And now there's a little problem here if black tries and takes on g2. So you might be worried that black is going to take here, but in this line they actually don't have the time to take. White has a series of moves to get this rook into the game a little unconventionally. So after rook to g1 and queen to h3, the only move to save the queen, there's rook g3, forcing the queen to h5, and it's important you force this queen to go to h5, because now after rook g5, you're forking the queen and the pawn here. So after queen h3, you take on e5 with the rook, and I don't think it takes a grandmaster to realize this position is worse for black. So because of this little maneuver with the rook, queen takes g2 is losing. So black should play something more like bishop to e6, and then after castles, knight d7 and d4, white is doing just fine. All of their pieces are going to get out in the game. The rooks are going to come to the center. Black does get to castle queenside, but they're lacking in development on the king side here. And I feel like black just really isn't going to catch up. So this is the Scandinavian Variation, just so people know that it does exist and what is going on. But like I said, queen takes d5, I do not recommend as the best move. Most Scandinavian variations of other openings are just subpar variations of the normal Scandinavian. And if you want to play the Scandinavian, you should just play it right away. You shouldn't be trying to go into some weird sideline here, which is a variation of it, because they're generally worse. Okay. So if you are not going to go queen takes d5, what else are you going to play? So I want to make sure black doesn't have any other moves here, but just checking my notes real quick. Looks like there are two moves left. One is bishop to d6, and the other is pawn to e4. So we're going to look at bishop to d6 first. This is known as the Moroxi Variation, named after the Hungarian grandmaster who often played this line as black. And really, all they're doing is developing the bishop and protecting the pawn. Now, some people might think this is a little bit of a waste of time because this bishop is kind of blocking the center just to defend a piece. Maybe you'd rather push. But there are some pluses to this. First, you are protecting your hanging pawn. And then also, this bishop is going to be attacking white's position after the push. So there are some pluses here. Now we're going to get into what white plays here. White can play pawn to d4 here, and this is the most played move, and really the best. There's a couple other moves. There's bishop to b5, which is one, and then is there a third? Yes, the third is like knight c3, but we'll get into that in just a second. We'll start off with pawn to d4, the most played and practically best try here for white. So after d4, black normally plays e4, gets this push in, again opens up the bishop, hits the knight, and now the knight just goes to e5. It might seem a little strange allowing black to just take, but first off, this opening really, for black, they want to keep their bishops because losing these pawns in the center will open up the lines for them. And then also here, if you take and white takes back, these pawns are going to be very strong, just kind of cramping black's position here. And this pawn on e4, you should just forget about it. White's going to win that easily. So knight e5, and here there's the move knight to f6. Now, after knight to f6, there's a couple different ideas here. The main one for white is just to go bishop b5 check. And now black can block the check with either the bishop or the knight. If they block with the bishop, we can take with our knight on e5, and we win the bishop pair. And then now both sides castle, we get c4, just building up our center, protecting d5 from the knight. And after a6, hitting the bishop, we can just trade this off. And after knight to c3, I think white has a very nice plus here. Very big pawn center, a lot of space. Rook is ready to go to e1. e4 is still a target. This should be just fine. If black tries to block with the knight, this can lead to some complications. Mainly because of this move here, bishop to g5. Bishop to g5, I think, is much more potent than what people will give it credit for. What this is doing is threatening to take on f6 and double the pawns. Now, how are you going to do that? If we take on f6 right away, the queen can take back. Well, you have to time this correctly. So first, black castles, and now you can take on d7 with the bishop and force these trades where now after the queen has gone on d7, it has forgotten this knight on f6, and now you can make this capture. And while this position isn't absolutely garbage for black, this one does present some problems with openings on the king side. So black may try to remedy this with king to h8 and rook to g8, getting some pressure on the king side. Now, this isn't the best choice of moves for either side, but this is just an illustrative example of how this can go, kind of how white wants. Now, because of these ideas of bishop to g5, the other move in this position, rather than knight f6, was suggested by E.J. Deemer, the same guy who helped develop the Blackmar-Deemer gambit, and he recommends knight to e7. And this is to avoid this pin where the pawn has to recapture, and it just reduces the possibilities of a wrecked king side. The problem with this is that this move is rather passive, and it will give white some chances to get an advantage here, because what's happening is the knight isn't really influencing the center as much as it could be. It's blocking the development of the other pieces, but this does avoid the pin. So some people would say that the avoiding the problems on the king side is worth it, but I think general consensus is this move is just a little too passive. But I do want to show that that one does exist. And then now the last move, or I guess I already covered bishop e5, is just white takes back, and this should just be better for white. Okay, let's see, checking in on the YouTube chat here. James Berry usually dislikes losing the bishops. Yes, that is kind of the idea for black here. You don't want to give up the bishop pair. With these pawns gone, the bishops do get a lot of space, a lot of open lines. Okay, so we had pawn to d4 here, and we talked about all the responses that black had. Let's talk about bishop to b5. This is another move that white has at their disposal, and black faces an uncomfortable choice here. So like I said, d4 is most played, probably the best line for white, but bishop to b5 can be a little surprising. Like I said, black has to make an uncomfortable decision here. what do they do to get rid of this check? Now, king f8, you really don't want to give up your right to castle here. You want to make sure you can develop very actively. So the choices you have are to sacrifice a pawn with c6, or you go bishop d7 and lose the bishop pair, or, excuse me, you go knight to d7 and you block your bishop from developing. And it's really, I mean, black really has to weigh what they're getting in each of these lines. So we'll start with c6. After c6, black's queenside pawns will not be the greatest because you are giving up a pawn over here. And because you're already down a pawn from the initial Elephant Gambit, that's just probably going to weigh much more than the potential activity black is going to get from this. So white should take on d6, and now black does need to take back. Knight takes c6 is the most played move and a bit better, but we'll take a look at what happens if the pawn takes. If the pawn takes, you just save your bishop, put some pressure on this f7 square, and after knight to f6, knight c3, you're developing normally, bishop to g4, d3 to open up your own bishop, castles, castles. White has a little bit of a plus here because of the development. This knight probably going to have to go to d7 because it can't go to c6, so the knight is just going to be a little bit more active for white, and this bishop is going to be able to develop easily. We'll go back to knight captures. Pawn d3, really just opening up the line for the bishop. Knight to e7, kind of connecting the knights here. And now a little bit of a strange move. You're probably going to be expecting something like castles or knight c3, which are still completely fine here. But I was doing some work with Stockfish 13 here, and pawn to a4 is the looks to be the best move here. And what this is doing is after something like pawn to a6, or really after castles where this pin is no longer important, the bishop wants to drop back, and this avoids any kind of a6, b5 in the future where the bishop has to go back, or even just knight a5 in this position. Now you can drop the bishop all the way back to a2, and now white doesn't need to worry about giving up their bishop pair. So black will play something like h6 here, trying to stop the pieces from coming in, and I think white also has a nice little advantage here. So that's if they play pawn to c6. The other options, bishop to d7 here. After bishop to d7, you just make the trade and the knight comes to d7. You can castle, they play knight to f6, and now knight c3. All this development should be pretty natural. You see black castle, rook to e1 hitting e5. The rook goes to e8 to kind of support it. And after pawn to d4 and e4, you play knight to e2, and this pawn on e4 is a little loose. So, Snowflake, thank you for joining us for your first time. Nice to have you here. So after knight d2, white is a little better here. The queen is looking to probably come to e2, but it's you don't want to rush it. But e4 is the target here. Now, the other move they have is knight d7, and this move also makes more sense, or not more sense, it also makes sense, because you're not giving up this light squared bishop, which is an important attacking piece for black. Like I said, black really wants to keep their bishops, so you don't get that traded off right away. The other plus is that you're not giving up another pawn on the queen side, so you're retaining a little bit of integrity over on that side of the board. And you also retain the possibility of winning back this d5 pawn. Very slim chances, but they're still there. So this move might be my recommendation if black were to go into this line. Now after knight to c3, you get knight to f6. Again, you see this normal development. Now here in this line after e4, this knight goes to g5, hitting the pawn right away from up front. And now after castles, castles, you'll notice this line is very similar to the bishop d7 line, but the difference is that one, the knight is a bit more aggressively posted. Two, the rooks are not on the e-file, so you don't have this extra activity happening on the e-file. And then the light squared bishops are still on the board, so still more chances for both sides. So this move, probably going to be the best continuation for black if they find themselves in this situation. And that kind of covers all of the bishop b5 check. Okay, so now after bishop to d6 in the Moroxi variation, we do want to take a look at knight to c3, because this might be a beginner's natural instinct. Develop the knights before the bishops. Now, this move is not horrible by any means. You are developing a piece, definitely good. But just because it's not bad doesn't mean it's great. In all the other lines, white is definitely making an active push to try and attack on this e-file, maybe win the e-pawn. So after knight c3, there's really no obvious opening advantage here. Besides, you still have the d5 pawn currently on the board, and you're a pawn up. So other moves in this position, like knight c3, which are fine, is like pawn to c4 is one, queen to e2 is one, d3 is one, and bishop c4. All these are not horrible moves, but they're not great moves. So white can avoid some of those. And I think that covers all of the Moroxi variation here. So like I said, I think d4 is going to be the best push here, because black really doesn't get a very easy way to develop on the king side later on. Okay, let me just scroll down, check my notes one more time, make sure that was everything. Looks like it was, which means now we can move on to kind of the last variation here in the Elephant Gambit that black can go for. And probably the most active, one that I really just appreciate that it exists, is pawn to e4. And we have Jane in the chat asking, what is Moroxi? That is the name of this bishop d6 variation that was named after a Hungarian grandmaster, Moroxi. He's also has the Moroxi bind in the Sicilian. That's a bit more well known. But okay, we're going to be looking at the advanced variation now. Now, advanced variation doesn't mean that this is for advanced players only. Advanced variation is just saying this pawn is advancing one more square forward. So this is a very sharp possibility where black is looking to fight right away, just because it is attacking the knight here. And white obviously has to do something about this. Now, rather than just move the knight, where black can retake on d5 with the queen, or develop with bishop to c5, other active moves, we actually go queen to e2. And this move is a bit of an exclam here, because you don't move the knight. It looks like this knight is still in trouble. But with this move, white is really putting the pressure on e4 and really asking black, what are you doing about this pawn here? So after queen to e2, black does need to worry about this pawn a little bit, and they normally defend with knight to f6. Now, there are two moves here for white. There's d3, which we'll get into in just a second, and there's knight c3. Now I want to cover knight c3 first, because after d3 there are some differences we need to worry about. So here, knight c3, it makes a lot of sense because you're trying to win this pawn and you are attacking with the knight. But there are some tactics that exist for black, or some tactical opportunities, where really one of the main ones is that white is going to struggle to get these pieces off of the e-file, which means that after black castles kingside, they can put a rook on e8 and then try and win the queen. So we'll look into this a little bit more. Bishop to e7. Sorry, I should explain why this is happening here. So there are a few moves that black has. I guess I'm confusing my lines a little bit here. But bishop e7 is the most played. And after knight takes e4, knight d5, just win the pawn back. No need to trade the knights and stay down a pawn. My recommendation here is that the queen just goes back to d1. This is not the most popular move here, but I think it's just the simplest for white. So after castles, bishop to c4, hitting the knight, knight to c6, and then rather than taking, you don't want to give up your bishop pair, you just castle. And this kind of just solves most of the problems white can face from black here. Just because you finally have those pieces off the e-file. You do give up a little bit of time here, though, because you do have to take that extra tempo to bring the queen back. But I think giving that tempo is worth it in order to avoid any problems from rook to e8 in the future. So bishop to g4 is the main move here, and you can play h3 just to kick the bishop. And here black's best move is to take. The reason why it's to take, normally you'll go bishop to g5, but with this knight on e4, an idea that some players might be familiar with from the Ruy Lopez or the Italian is knight to g3, and it hits this bishop again, and if it goes back to g6, rook to e1, and white is very rapidly catching up in this development. Now they just need to play d3, and they're pretty much good to go. This bishop is ready to hop into the action. Or even just c3 and d4 and wait to develop this bishop at a later date. So after bishop takes f3, queen takes f3, now we see knight to d4 hitting the queen and the c2 pawn. Just queen to d1 yet again, but now black has no problems and white is up a healthy pawn. And that is going to be where white gets their play, is in this endgame they have the bishop pair and an extra center pawn. That's going to be what they're playing on. So that is knight c3. Now, even though this is playable, there is a better move, is pawn to d3. And theoretically, this position after d3 can almost be viewed as a refutation. However, as one of our favorite grandmasters have said, theory and practice are the same in theory, but not in practice. If you look this position up in a database, it's not a clean win for white every single time. This position is actually around 50% win for white and 30% draw, with 23% win for black, which is still good chances for black if they are playing this position. So let's get into some of the theory here, see why this move can be so strong. Well, right away, you are attacking this pawn again, which is what we're trying to do. We're trying to attack this pawn, win the pawn on e4. And black is trying to castle, develop, and get ready. And now we reach another one of those weird decisions. Here we're going to look at the problems of developing the bishop and what move black should play instead. So if black is trying to castle right away, there's a couple moves they can look at. First is bishop to e7. Now this one doesn't take much calculation to realize why this move might be poor. Is that even if they castle and get the rook to e8, they've now blocked the e-file for themselves, which is where black is going to be getting that compensation for the pawn. So you're just blocking yourself. You're not going to get that compensation you want. So after pawn takes and castles, knight c3, rook e8, bishop to e3 just blocks off this file from any tactics. And now after bishop to b4, knight to d2. And the reason knight to d2 is played is because e4 is attacked. And after bishop takes, you want there to at least be something here, so that way after these trades you're not completely toast. Something like queen d3 is going to be fine here. White is still going to have a very healthy game. So bishop e7, not a great move for black. Bishop c5 is an improvement, but here white is still going to be better. Pawn takes e4, castles, knight c3, rook e8, these standard moves that we just saw. And now instead of bishop to e3, we get bishop to g5. The idea is you are pinning this knight, so you are removing an attacker from the e4 pawn. We see pawn to h6 with the idea that if you go back, I'm going to play g5, and after the bishop moves back again, I'm going to capture on e4. Actually, you probably can't do that right away because of the knight, but that's the general idea here. So bishop takes on f6, just removing this attacker. Queen takes on f6, and now white gets to roll these pawns down the board. You go e5, queen goes to f5, and now castles queenside. You get the king off of the e-file, so you don't have to worry about any rook e5 nonsense. Knight to d7, again helping for rook to e5. And now white has an interesting maneuver here that is not very well known. It's been played in one game before, and I think it was in a computer championship here, where white goes knight to b5, hitting the c pawn, threatening to fork. So bishop to b6 to protect, and we get a very interesting move that is very reminiscent of Alpha 0, is pawn to e6. And you give up this pawn. Now, why are you giving up this pawn? Why do you sacrifice it? Well, you're going to lose this pawn anyway. There's just too many attackers on it for you to defend again. And rather than just make some move right away, if you push it right now, the only way for them to take is with their pawn. And here, now that this f-pawn has left the pawn island on the king side, this pawn is now a new target that's going to stick around for the rest of the game. So this is going to be a more static target, this isolated king's pawn. And now, rather than taking and letting black get some activity, you push the pawn to d6 and you're threatening to take on c7 again. So after c6, knight c7, take, and now they get rid of this fork problem, and white has this passed pawn that's all the way up the board. Okay, and now after something like pawn to e5, queen to e3, opening up the path for the bishop, this is just fine for white. White is going to be much better, and white went on to win this game. Okay, now we're going to go look at, instead of bishop to c5, we're going to look at what happens if they go bishop to b4 with this check. So this is another thing that's happening here, is black can try and get this tempo right away, and if white plays c3, they don't even have to move the bishop back. They can castle right away, because if you take, they're going to take on f3, and now after queen takes, knight takes d5, and now suddenly it's black who is better. Black is actually better in this position. So you can't just allow them to take on f3. So you take on e4 with the pawn. And now we see bishop c5, saving the bishop. Bishop to g5, again pinning the knight to remove an attacker, and rook to e8. Knight to d2 to defend, and pawn c6. Takes on c6, and castles queenside. And now white has just escaped any problems black can pose in the opening here. They're ready to go with moves like knight c4 to e3 and d5, or knight to b3, just hitting the bishop and the queen. So here white is also going to have a healthy advantage. So if none of these bishop moves are working out for black, I think we have to come to the conclusion that black should not be trying to castle soon here. There actually is a move here that is fine for black, and it is queen takes d5. This is, again, a bit more of a newer idea. And, I mean, here, this seems to be playable. I believe this is still being played in correspondence with queen to d5. And now some of the developing ideas for white are going to include knight to d2, hitting e4 again. And now after black develops knight c6, you can take on e4 with your pawn, hitting the queen. Now the queen moves, and pawn to h3. This is stopping any knight to g4, or in the future, bishop to g4. And now bishop to d6, you can go queen e3, and this is opening up your bishop again. After castles, bishop to d3, because after rook e8 there's going to be more pressure on e4, that's why the bishop is going to d3 instead of c4. Knight to d7, looking to go to c5, hitting the bishop and the pawn. So pawn to c3 is a way around this. This was one of the moves that I didn't see right away, but this is a very interesting idea, is just play pawn to c3. Now if they go knight to c5, you can just tuck the bishop away on c2, and you still maintain your control over e4. But now instead we'll see bishop to c5. This is a bit more common. And here, not the most played move. I think the most played move here is queen e2, but I was asking myself, why can I not just play knight d4 here? And I don't believe this has been played before, but this is going to be my recommendation, is you just go knight to d4, and there has to be some liquidation. I mean, you're attacking both of these pieces. Now, they don't have to take. Honestly, you're hoping they take so you can recapture with the pawn. and then still have a nice center here. But they don't have to. Instead, they can just play knight d to e5, hitting the bishop. And once the bishop goes back to c2, this position is pretty equal. I think queen g6 is an idea here, hitting the g-pawn. And I was looking at it. It looks like kingside castle should be fine for white. So this is going to be my recommendation, is this knight d4 move, rather than queen e2. And this position, as far as I know, is still being worked out with the theory, still being tested in games. As far as I know, there has not been a set opinion on this position, but I think it's very interesting for both sides, and if black is going to play the Elephant Gambit, this should be the type of position they are looking for. But that is basically all the theory I have prepared for you guys tonight. This is Chess Openings Explained. We went over the Elephant's Gambit. We have about 7 minutes left here, so I do want to open it up to any questions the chat may have. So if there's a specific position, if you can remember what line it was, if you can say the name of the line and what move, that would be helpful. That way I know exactly what you're talking about, and we'll be able to answer any questions you have. So yeah, with that being said, I'm going to turn to the chat and see what is popping up. Frank Kepler saying, whoa, I should have an engine confirming what's on the board. I did have an engine confirm. I was using Stockfish 13 at depth 40 earlier. And you're probably freaking out because it says white is much better. But if you look at all of these lines, white is usually just +1 in everything. And this is a position that so far has not been worked out. So if you get this in a tournament game, I mean, no one's going to have an engine with them at a tournament. So this position should just be playable for black here. Definitely not the best position. I'm not recommending like play the Elephant Gambit over like the Najdorf. I'd be foolish to recommend that. But if you are going to be playing the Elephant, this is what I'm expecting black to try and go for. I think this is one of the best tries. Okay. What else is happening in the chat? Hey Nick, nice to see you again. What is the next opening we're bringing to the channel next week? I don't have anything specific planned right now. I do have a couple openings in the works. So if there's anything you would like to see specifically, just drop a recommendation in the chat or in the comments after this video gets published. I always take a look at that to see what people want. James Berry, isn't it kind of bad to have two files open next to each other? I don't know who told you that, but that is simply incorrect. There are a lot of openings where having the two center files open are just completely great. It's actually very good for your rooks. Your rooks get to go to the center of the board. They have full control of the open files. So I have to disagree. Having the two files next to each other is not bad. There may be some certain situations where it is, and that might be what you're referring to, but in general, I cannot say that that would be bad. Okay, looks like we're getting a question in the main line with black playing pawn to e4, so the advanced variation. What do I think about knight e5 followed by d4? This is playable. Black can take, and then if you want d4 right away, this is definitely looking like it's playable. If they take on d3, you just recapture with the knight. But the problem here is that after everything's been traded off in the center, yeah, you are going to get a tempo on the queen, but what are your threats? You don't have any like tension or anywhere to fight for, which is one of the problems with trading your pieces very early on, is that if all you do is trade your pieces, you could be thinking, oh, I'm trading closer to a draw, which if you want to draw, that's fine. But when you trade a piece, you're also reducing your chances significantly to build up that pressure and get that activity to convert into an advantage, and ideally convert that advantage into a win. So if you trade too many things really early, you lose a lot of your chances, and I feel like with this line, you are losing a lot of chances. So hopefully that answers your question. Amir Ansari, what if black plays queen g6 and then captures on d4 with the knight or bishop? I would like you to tell me what line that is, because queen g6 is played a lot. I don't know what line exactly you're talking about. And let's see. Queen g6 and then captures on d4 with the knight or bishop. So you're probably talking about this main line here. Well, okay, after queen g6 we castles, and now if they take, I mean, I'm going to be super happy if they take with the knight. If they take with the knight, I take with the pawn, and this is a fork. So they would have to take with the bishop, and even if they take with the bishop, I'm still super happy, because what's happening is I get a recapture with the pawn, and now look who has the pawn center. White has the pawn center, black does not. So white's going to have a lot of control over this game, and black needs to be careful not to let these pawns just run down the board. So, Amir, I'm sorry, I hope that's the position you were talking about. That is kind of the idea I had when I came up with knight to d4. NJ Fan 9000 is recommending I make a video on the two knights defense. I'm assuming that's against the Italian, right? I'm not too familiar with like 1e5 from black, just because I don't play it personally. And then I may have creative insults, but none that I can share on stream. So, Frank Kepler, chess isn't all about winning. Well, I mean, if you try not to win in chess, I mean, I don't know why you would play chess if all you're playing for is a draw. I mean, I'm here to teach people how to win, how to maximize their chances. So for me, chess is all about winning, because it's my job to help people win. Can I quickly teach the Sicilian? I could, but I'm not going to, because I've already released a couple videos on the channel. Caleb Denby's done an amazing series on the Najdorf on our channel. So if you want to learn the Sicilian, if you want to learn a specific line, we already have tons of content available on our YouTube channel that you can check out after the stream ends. Okay, we are wrapping up our time here. I'll give it just another minute or two in case there's any last minute questions. After this stream ends here on YouTube, we are going to switch to Twitch, where we are going to resume my series, The Winner's Circle, where we are following Smyslov's wins in the 1953 candidates. We took like a 3-week break because of the candidates, and we also have some construction going on at the chess club regarding our new expansion. But we're back. I'm streaming here from home. We have our openings class back on Mondays. We have the Winner's Circle happening right after this on Twitch. Make sure to check that out. Okay. Oh, Frank was just justifying the insults. Okay, I understand. Okay, Witter Cosman is asking, do I know a super GM that plays or used to play the Elephant? Right off the top of my head, I do not, but it would not surprise me if Magnus has whipped it out from time to time. Let me pull up the position here after d5, check the database real quick. Looks like Super GMs. It looks like MVL has played this. I would doubt it was in a classical game. But MVL played this against Mosesian in 2010. And that is the first game that's popping up here on the Lichess database. If we're looking at ED5 and I guess E4, I guess this is the line that he played as well. So he does have one game in the database here. He also lost that game, so I don't know what that says about it. But definitely in Blitz, I would say try this one out. Definitely going to catch your opponent off guard. And like I said, after knight takes e5, black still has a lot of tricks definitely possible, and most people who see this position for the first time will take on e5 because they're worried about the queen taking. Now, after you watch this video, you know queen taking isn't that great, but I mean, there's definitely tricks here for both sides. What channel? What's the Twitch account? Yeah, so after this is over, when we go to Twitch, it's going to be on STL Chess Club, so it's still going to be the St. Louis Chess Club's stream. It's not going to be my own Twitch here, but I do stream chess on my own Twitch from time to time. ChessRemoteTV if you want to check it out. Let's see, people are requesting Black Mardemer Gambit. Why does Magnus not have famous, unbelievable games like Fisher or Bobby? Well, okay, Bobby Fischer is the same guy. Or Anand. Well, I mean, in Magnus's defense, I don't have any of Anand's games memorized. I think Fischer was just very popular because of the what else was happening in the world at that time. It was a very big U.S. versus Russia, not just in chess, but in everything else. I mean, we had the space race. That was the other big one. So I think it was just that those are famous because of the time period, and they're also famous just because they're older. They're older. But yeah, I mean, all of Magnus's games are still happening now. Give it a century, I'm sure people will have some of his games memorized. And no, like, creative games. I would encourage you to go back and check Magnus's games then, because Magnus definitely has creative games. If you look at his games and say he doesn't have creativity, I don't know. But they definitely are creative. Okay, one last question from XO. Get it in the chat, and then we'll switch over to Twitch. We are starting to run over time here. Yeah, James Berry does have a point. Magnus can play garbage openings against other super GMs and still win. I mean, the last 2 titled arenas on Lichess, he's been playing the Bomb Cloud and just absolutely crushing. So... Oh, the last question of the night is, would I rather play Monopoly forever or chess to never exist? Well, I guess if I play Monopoly forever, I'm not playing chess. So it's like chess never existed, eh? I'm stuck on that question. I'm gonna plead the fifth on that one and claim that I have nothing to do with Monopoly. Good question though. But okay, I think that is all we have for tonight. I do see some of the other comments coming in tonight. I mean, I'm just giving quick answers to the questions, guys. I mean, I'm not like a doctorate in history or chess, you know? I'm just giving quick answers to what I think makes sense to me. It's all opinion. But that is it. That is Chess Openings Explained. That is the Elephant Gambit. Hopefully some of you guys got inspired by this. Some of you may check it out. Some of you guys may know how to play against it now. If you have any cool games with it, you know, import it into Lichess. Drop the link in the comments section. Love to see your guys' results with this. Again, any recommendations for new openings, drop in the comments as well. I'm always taking a look for them. But yeah, we're going to wrap it up here on YouTube and move to Twitch. So thank you everybody for showing up. We'll see you over there.